guest, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who is widely understood to have won the 2020 Belarusian elections, and Alexander Lukashenko claimed. You're closing us out. You're our final guest. Thank you very much. I'm sure you'd much rather be closing out Alexander Lukashenko than us. Let's ask an easy question to begin with, which of course you won't believe is an easy question. You'd never trust the journalist that you know perfectly well who says that. We're in a situation, aren't we? We have the Belarusian opposition movement, which you lead. Mm-hmm. We have the EU. We have the Trump administration. Are you all speaking from the same page? Because you see, quite rightly, Lukashenko as an autocrat, illegitimate. So does the EU. But here we have President Trump, who invited him recently onto his border peace and has described him as a respected ruler of Belarus. Does it worry you that there doesn't seem to be coordination really between all you three?
Look, of course, transatlantic unity was always important, for joint position, joint policy, but so is, the dynamic is changing, and President Trump's policy is more transactional, I would say. So we see this, gap between two policies. But in our case, Trump's policy worked rather well towards Belarus because with the help of President Trump, John Cole, special envoy appointed by the President, State Department, release of political prisoners took place in Belarus. Of course, it's very important that we have to watch on this process only as on humanitarian track. It shouldn't mean legitimization of the regime or normalization of the relationship with Lukashenko. Lukashenko lost elections, he seized power, and it's like, should remain like this. As for Europe, we ask Europe not to copy President Trump's policy because we have such formula. American sanctions to release people, European sanctions to release the country. Because while people are released, we still have thousands of political prisoners behind bars. Some people are released, twice more are detained. So it's not change of the policy of Lukashenko. And just to stop this, we need irreversible and systematic changes in Belarus. And for this reason, European sanctions will play its role. So we're asking Europe to hold their strong cards for bigger game. Usually, in our history, Europe always was like a good cop, and America was bad cop because it was Belarusian Democracy Act, huge amount of sanctions. Now, just rules has changed. The USA, good cop, dealing with communicating with the regime regarding release of political prisoners, and Europe is like a bad cop, increasing pressure, increasing isolation, just to release the country, because it's in Europe's interest also that Belarus is free, democratic. Because while Lukashenko is there, who is serving to Putin's interest, it will be a threat to security architecture of the whole region. So we have together get Belarus out of Russia's course.
But do you think Washington thinks that? I mean, is the end game for Washington your end game, and the end game of Brussels would be to see Lukashenko go? But is that what's on the mind of the Trump administration? We saw in Venezuela, for example, they took away Maduro and his wife. They're in jail in New York, but they've left the regime in place. Do you worry that that's their thinking as well, that they will be happy for no regime change, particularly an independent, democratic Belarus?
Look, Venezuela is on the American continent, and the USA is more interested in changes in their region. I totally think that, Lukashenko is not even in the orbit of attention of President Trump. Mm-hmm. He delivered this humanitarian track to John Cole, please release people. And it's so important for us that President Trump 4 times publicly demanded release of political hostages. So he's interested in success story of Belarus. It will be his victory, President Trump's victory. So let's not spoil this process. So let's President Trump be President Trump, doing what he can, because President Trump has sticks and carrots in his hands, and if carrots will not work well, so sticks can be used. And of course, Lukashenko is selling people. He's not just releasing our political prisoners because he suddenly became humane. And of course the USA is lifting sanctions in exchange of political prisoners, but again, European sanctions are much stronger. And for example, sanctions on potash have been lifted from the USA, but without transit through Europe, this release of sanctions is not so profitable, for Lukashenko. So that's why the USA is not pushing Europe to change their policy, is their track, and Europeans, can continue this track of isolation.
I mean, that twin-track approach, there is some, though, dispute or debate within the Belarusian opposition, is there not, about sanctions. I mean, I read one of your colleagues suggesting that there should be more dialogue between Europe and Lukashenko, even with the possibility of using sanctions, easing sanctions to get some progress. You disagree with that, don't you? You think the sanctions are absolutely crucial.
I think that sanctions do really work. I think sanctions, it's very important and effective instruments to make dictators or regimes change their behavior. In the case of Europe, we have to understand that almost all the sanctions of European Union were imposed because of the co-aggression, participation of Lukashenko in this war. And we cannot exclude the war out of this process. And it's misperception that if we, for example, lift sanctions, Lukashenko will be glad to talk. He doesn't need this conversation. He wants capitulation of Europe. He wants to show that he won this battle. In our history, European Union, Belarusian history, it was many times when Lukashenko detained people, then was selling it to Europe, lifting sanctions, and it was repeated many, many times. I think that we have to stop this vicious circle. Moreover, new threat appeared, like Russia and Russia's ally Lukashenko, that Lukashenko can provide our territory for further escalations against Europe, for example. So we have to dismantle this regime just to have Belarus as reliable, good neighbor without any hybrid attacks, without constant blackmailing of Europe. So the goal is big. So you have instruments, to influence this. We are not asking Europe to do all the job instead of us, but help us to be stronger, to be alternative to Russian world, to Lukashenko, but be consistent. Because of course Lukashenko wants try to fool you again, as it was done many times before. So Europe has enough power, enough instruments, to stay principled and strong.
And that would include continuing with sporting sanctions as well, wouldn't it? I mean, for example, the head of the International Federation for Ice Hockey 2 days ago was suggesting that Belarusian and Russian ice hockey players should be allowed back in. What's your reaction to that? You presumably would think that's a wrong move.
Look, I think this narrative that sport is out of politics, culture is out of politics, now everything is politics. You have principled position that co-aggressors, those who are killing people, those nations cannot participate if you take sport in international games. My opinion, no, they cannot. Because they feel impunity, they misuse international platforms just to promote their ideas, to tell lie, because they also use these games just to highlight Russia, as if Russian actions, have nothing to do with the Russian sportsmen. It's all the same. All the institutions, all the organizations have to be principled and choose the side. Either you are on the good side or on the side of evil. There is no something middle at this very moment.
You said recently in the speech that the outcome in Belarus will be dictated by the outcome of the Ukrainian war. Yeah. That when the war is over, attention can turn to to Belarus. But playing devil's advocate here, you could possibly see another thing developing, that the war ends for whatever reason, a peace deal, whatever. But the attention doesn't particularly turn to Belarus. Ukrainians will be focused on rebuilding Ukraine, and the EU will be happy to go back to business as usual. I mean, do you fear that the war's ending in Ukraine, in a sense, will take pressure off the EU and others to focus on Belarus as well?
Look, I think, first of all, we don't have to see Belarusian case and Ukrainian case separately, because both our nations are facing the same enemy, imperialistic ambitions of Russia, and they want to ruin our national identity. They want to subjugate our countries. They want to be hosts, on our land. And I'm so glad that President Zelensky understands the strategic importance of Belarus. And recently, so many times mentioned Belarus, like European Union projects will not be completed without Belarus and Ukraine, that eastern border of Europe lays on the eastern border of Belarus, that if Europe was more active in supporting Belarusians in 2020, maybe the war wouldn't have started at all. So Ukrainians understand that they cannot be, even when the war stops, they cannot be only concentrated on rebuilding of Ukraine, because the enemy will be still there. So of course, a lot depends how the war will be ended. Will it be a long-lasting and just peace, or just short break for Russia to regroup itself and start attacking again? But we always have to keep in mind, while Lukashenko is there, it will be launching pad for further possible attacks on Ukraine, but also on the European Union. Everybody understands, if we allow Russia to feel that they won this war, the only question is who will be the next. We already see how that in Belarus they are intensifying presence of Russia. So many Belarusian enterprises produce military stuff for Russian war machine. They are building new enterprise for building up to 100,000 drones per year. So constant drills on the territory of Belarus, hybrid attacks on European borders, blackmailing with the nuclear weapon, with the Areshnik. So it will be there all the time. So the world, European world, will never be relieved if Lukashenko is there, who is serving to Putin's interests. So it's strategic interest of Ukraine that Belarus is also free. And I'm sure that after the end of the war, hopefully, I truly believe it will be a victory of Ukraine, the attention will return back to Belarus, just to help Belarusians win our fight as well.
You've been talking with the Ukrainian leadership in recent weeks. What have you asked of them, and what have they asked of you?
Actually, it was our first official meeting with President Zelensky. I'm so glad it happened, because Belarusians have been waiting for this a long time, and I was invited by President to visit Kiev, and we really have long program, in this visit, because we have Belarusian diaspora there, we have Belarusian military volunteers who are fighting on the side of Ukraine. Of course, my first question will be how Belarusians can help Ukraine to win this war. We are people or nation without state. Our state is seized by the regime. We cannot give Ukraine billions of euros or some military equipment, but on political level we can advocate, to the world, give Ukraine everything they need to win this war. In Ukraine, our volunteers helping to Ukrainians in these cold days. Our freedom fighters, defending military Ukraine. So we can propose, at least something. So we have to elaborate on joint strategy, Belarus and Ukrainian strategy, how to promote each other's course. And of course, we have to discuss after Lukashenko era, because it will take place. And now we see that Ukrainians chose the side. Ukrainians will never forget what Lukashenko has done, will never forgive him. So they see that democratic forces of Belarus reliable partners. We for 5 years managed to stay united, to build alternative institutions of power, to formalize a relationship with democratic world, and we trustable partners. So now it's time to work together on future of both our nations, but also how to reach.
Will you be opening an office in the Ukrainian capital?
Sorry?
Will you open up an office in the Ukrainian capital?
Yeah, we actually have missions of Democratic Belarus in many countries, including Brussels, Czech Republic, and we have mission in Kiev. But of course, this visit will bring more, more strength to this office, and we will get more contacts, inside Ukraine, and it will work more effectively.
You've recently moved office, your own operations, from Vilnius to Warsaw. It came after a downgrading of the security for you and others in Vilnius. Is there a connection between the two? A former Lithuanian foreign minister has criticized the downgrading of security and felt it was a message to you that you weren't so warmly embraced anymore in Lithuania, which he thought was a mistake.
Look, first of all, Lithuania is a great country. What has done Lithuania for these 5 years for Belarusian people, it cannot be forgotten, of course. Hundreds of thousands of people found safe refuge in Lithuania. Lithuania has been changing laws, just to make life of Belarusians more comfortable. Lithuania strategically, defending Belarusian interests. Very strong position regarding sanctions, pressure, very principled. Lithuania is the only country that launched process of bringing Lukashenko to accountability. They sent referral to International Criminal Court to start investigation against crimes. It's a fantastic job. And I really don't want to, because I had to change the country, to show Lithuania in bad light. Yes, with the new government came to power with some with different view on cooperation with democratic forces, and security protocols have changed. And it's not only about me personally, but about the work of the whole office, because all these years we are attacked by KGB, and thanks to close cooperation with special Lithuanian structures, no information was leaked from our office. So we just we decided to broaden our presence in Poland. So office stayed in Vilnius. It has diplomatic recognition by Lithuania. So just the other some people will work from Poland at the moment. So and of course, for me it's important that the change towards Belarusians will not change. Attitude to Belarusians will not change, and Minister of Foreign Affairs Budrys and President Nausėda are very supportive, very concrete about the attitude towards Belarus. They continue to put pressure on the regime, despite actually all the attempts of the regime to provoke Lithuania on the borders. Maybe you don't know that this regime sends these meteor balloons with smuggling cigarettes that interrupts airspace of Lithuania, and they have to stop many flights, actually. So they're very strong on Belarus, and I'm so grateful for this.
Closer to home, your husband was recently released from prison. But you can leave prison, but the prison doesn't necessarily leave you. It takes time to recover. How's his recovery going? And will we see him back in active frontline politics soon?
I have to say that people who went through Lukashenko's prisons are extremely traumatized, emotionally and physically. And people, first of all, have to take care of themselves and go through the process of rehabilitation. And my husband spent 5 years without children, so he's trying to deal with his health, with just to calm down a little bit, to understand what has been happening for these 5 years, because people were jailed in 2020 in revolutionary situation. Now the context has changed, the war has started, people even in exile, terrorized by a Belarusian regime, transnational repressions blossoming from regime. So it's difficult, to understand, to catch up with all the processes, and but of course people immediately want to dive into this fight. They want to contribute, and of course I'm so glad that so many strong leaders are released, and they can be strong voices for Belarus, tell their stories, because very often I see, I feel this feeling of fatigue of Belarus, and it looks like nothing is happening. Lukashenko is still there, no beautiful big rallies, and it looks like the situation has normalized. And our leaders, our people, our release is clear explanation that repressions are continuing, that people every day are still detained in Belarus. So through personal stories, we can again return focus to our country, but also it's important to understand that Belarus now it's only about humanitarian crisis or political crisis, but now it's also about security. And people who just released also have to, to feel, this moment and give broader context of Belarus.
What's the status of the opposition inside Belarus? I mean, a few years ago, there's Lukashenko. He's on the ropes. There are mass protests. He uses extreme violence to repress that. Is there any opposition really happening inside the country at the moment? How would you characterize that?
Look, status of Belarusian opposition in Belarus, we are extremists, we are terrorists, we are prostitutes, we are whoever. But look, the fact that 5 years in a row Lukashenko is fighting people, he cannot calm down because he knows that underground resistance in Belarus exists. As only he stops repressions, people will be on the streets again. And as I said, people who in exile, we can be, of course, more active. We build alternative institutions of power. We have so many allies in the democratic world who, stand firm with us. Of course, with the help of military and fear, you can suppress people. People in a safe mode at the moment, but it doesn't mean that the moods have changed. It doesn't mean that there will be the next moment of opportunity. All those people who are underground at the moment, they will not be active again. And how people who inside the country can help, can contribute into our fight, they're giving us information. What is happening in Belarus? Even people in the system of Lukashenko giving us very sensitive data. For example, how sanctions are circumvented, or how Lukashenko militarizing our economy.
At what level is that? I mean, quite senior people within the regime? I'm not asking for names.
So yeah, it's just people who are rather close, to the main personage of this regime, and we have to understand that all those people are facing maybe death penalty if they are discovered. So I'm so grateful to everyone who is helping us with information. And also I'm so grateful to Belarusians that despite all the restrictions on free media, that all free media in Belarus who are actually broadcasting from exile, they declared as extremists. And if you are stopped on the streets and KGB, see in your mobile that you are tweeting something or put or commenting some extremist information, you will be detained for years and years in jail. So, but despite of this, about 70% of consumers of free media are from inside the country.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one final question. We're about almost out of time, unfortunately. You said recently as well the Belarusian opposition movement outside needs to broaden its support to the Belarusian community, and also some of the more traditional parties being more involved with the movement. How can you do that? How can you get some more of the traditional political parties involved and broaden out to a wider Belarusian community?
Look, just for context, all the Belarusian like alternative or free parties in Belarus, they have been liquidated, ruined, so they cannot participate in political
Sure.
life in Belarus. Most of the leaders had to flee Belarus because of repressions, but I'm so grateful that they continue their party work, being in exile. They are
But involved with you as well, involved with your movement.
absolutely, yes. You know, we are in cooperation with them, maybe not so actively, but we have coordination council. It's one of our structures that looks like proto-parliament, and we encouraging typical or like orthodox, parties to participate in this new system. But nevertheless, they have sister parties, European sister parties, and they communicating with them, trying to promote Belarus. But we want to include all the Belarusians into our movement. There is so much to do. We have so many problems, questions with legalization abroad. We have to keep our national identity that is being ruined in Belarus, human rights defenders, political structure. So, we really building like democratic society, new one. And I think that we are the only, we are the movement that is the only alternative to Russian world. We have, while keeping pressure on the regime, while weakening the regime, we have to strengthen ourselves. Because in the moment of opportunity, there will be only two alternatives for Russian world. Either somebody pro-Russian who will push our country closer to Russia and we on the eve of losing our independence, or pro-European, pro-democratic nation, people who will be build new Belarus that can integrate into European system, and we can return to our European roots.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
And that's the end of our session. You wrapped us up.
Thank you.
Thank you.